to put in something for everyone to an extent that hardly seems possible in real life. And because of the great surplus of everything in this bill, of venues for wagering and of recipients for the receipts of this wagering, it looks like something that is way too good to be true, and something which, like wagering itself, is going to make a world of winners and losers. If you start with the question that, the big question that seems to have so divided the bodies, how many venues and what kinds of venues, we seem to have ended up with so many venues in this state that one wonders how a state of 6.5 million people will be able to support them. In this bill, we have 5 new venues, plus we know that under IGRA, the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, our 2 existing tribes have a claim to any new form of gaming that's legalized in the state. That brings us up to 7. Plus we have our 2 existing racetracks, assuming they continue to exist, the horse racing tracks, we're up to 9. And we have our lottery, that's 10. And we know from reading the newspapers that the federal government is very close to legalizing internet gambling. So the question arises in my mind, how many gambling venues, opportunities can a state of 6.5 million people support, even if we get a few tourists from here and there? And the answer that suggests itself to me is not all of these so-called opportunities are going to be happening. We're going to have winners and losers here. And the outcome of all of this work and all of this new authorization is going to translate into winners and losers in ways that are perhaps not predictable now, but the picture that's painted for us is not a realistic one and is untenable. It's as if we were going to say, we're going to create jobs in Massachusetts, we're going to build 500 new shopping malls. Well, we know that that wouldn't happen because the market can't bear it. And in just the same way, the market is not going to bear what is put forward here. Last week, one of the Globe columnists was commenting on this process in the legislature and saying, why does the legislature have to make this complicated? This is so simple, it's obvious. We can support 2 venues, one at Suffolk and one close enough to the Rhode Island border that we put Twin River out of business. A dazzling suggestion to make in the local press, and a clear recognition that even lay people recognize that there is a limit to this market. The bill that we have before us, the pair of bills, oversaturates this market to a point that is laughable. And if we pretend that this picture is all going to come to pass, we are deluding ourselves. I think one of the Senate conferees yesterday actually made a Freudian slip when he stood before the microphone and said of these bills, it's not a silver lining. There's no silver lining here as I see it. What I see is pure cloud. Pure cloud. There's got to be a trade-off because the projections that we're talking about are not realistic ones. We're told that we are to expect 1.3 to 1.8 billion in gross gaming revenue annually in this Commonwealth. Now, the best projections that I've seen of what we may be losing out of state is between 700 and 800 million annually. That's under $1 billion in total amount wagered. And this 1.3 to 1.8 billion doesn't actually reflect the total amount wagered, because gross gaming revenue is the amount wagered minus the prizes. So the projection we're talking about is more like 1.5 to 2 billion annually wagered. I'm Denise, I'm not rude. Not at this time, thank you.
Chair recognizes Mr. Pedoni.
Not at this time, thank you.
Yield.
So we're talking about $2 billion wagered out of the Massachusetts economy, basically, which is more than twice of what we think is traveling out of state to be wagered, and an assumption that it's going to appear, and the further assumption that this money could come forward and be spent on wagering without subtracting that amount of money, over $1 billion, from other parts of the economy. And certainly I would expect subtracting it from the lottery as well. The lottery that we rely on for so much local aid already, and which yields a relatively high return to the Commonwealth because it is a Commonwealth enterprise. Maybe we can backfill the lottery with some of this new revenue, but at best it's backfilling, and I am skeptical that we can even do so. Certainly, in the course of attempting to do so, we will see collateral damage to other parts of our economy, because there is a literature throughout the nation on the displacement effect of what happens to local economies when gambling is introduced, expanded gambling, new forms of wagering. Money shifts. New money is not created. There's also good literature on what happens to populations that have expanded wagering opportunities introduced. The Rappaport Institute did a study where they found that in counties that had casinos, personal bankruptcies go up by 10%. That's a nationwide average, 10%. Last Sunday, we read in our paper of record that personal bankruptcy was up 25% in Massachusetts. Wonderful, great news. Let's push it up another 10%. This is not a sustainable model. It is not economic development. And I think one of the great ironies of the bills before us, in the last section of House 5001, there is an ambitious proposal to study various aspects of gambling policy and habits and effects and revenue and the experience of other states. I think it's actually almost hilarious that we're going to introduce this industry first and study it later, especially given that in the 1980s at UMass Amherst, there was an enormous study done, the U.S. gambling study, that gave us a tremendous amount of information about the experience nationwide, the experience at Atlantic City that my colleague, the gentleman from Medford, alluded to, and in other states where, as we're faced with this bill, the introduction of casino gambling has been has been put forward as a golden goose, a solution, and turned out to be, again, not a silver lining. And yet, we haven't really relied on that information, looked at that study, or paid attention to its conclusions that clearly show that casino gambling, slots parlors are not economic development. They're not a substitute for economic development, and they damage real economic development. And for these reasons and lots of others, some of which you've heard me speak about when this was previously debated in the House, so I won't bring them up again, I would ask that the members join me in rejecting this conference committee report. Thank you.
Question now comes on the acceptance of the conference committee report. All those in favor?